For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dominic Meglio. I'm the Director of Client Relations at Right Reason Technologies. And we're going to be talking today about our system for managing APPR scores and specifically talking about SLOs, how that's changing, and also talking a bit about the changes in our system for observations. I want to start out by giving everybody a little bit of the scope of our background in APPR, talk about some of the new features in our system. So no one in here used us last year for APPR, so everything's new for you, but this is specifically what came for this school year. And then we're also going to get into the system, and kind of what our goal is going to be is to have you using the system on the tablets in front of you to basically do a walkthrough observation of me in this presentation today. Our goal is going to be to allow everyone here to understand what does our system do and what specifically is new when it comes to APPR, to explore the new observation scheduling capabilities of our system, and then, as I mentioned, to conduct a walkthrough. Go over some of the numbers. This is just obviously from last school year, so 1 year of APPR data just for districts working with us, and we work with about 40 to 50 districts across the state. So we've had 7,500 SLOs entered, completed, and scored in our system, which is kind of a lot when you think of 1 year. 2,300 informal observation, and the next one should be 6,000 formal observations done. A lot of observations going on in our system. 5,000 60-point scores calculated. And then 5,800 scores that were reported to New York State for APPR. So they're 100-point scores. And obviously, if you're looking, none of the numbers all add up because we had different districts using us for different services. So there were districts who just used us for SLOs, just for observations, some who did everything on paper and then basically said that we do want a mechanism to send this up to Albany. So there may be teachers who sent their scores to Albany with us but never did any of the calculations with us. The fun part on the district side of this is a whole lot of data to be expected to have to manage during a school year. And it's new data. It's stuff no one has ever been familiar with. This is all brand new stuff that you had to keep track of, you had to calculate and store and report and ensure the accuracy of. And thankfully, you know, I'm hoping everyone in here was successful at getting it up at noon yesterday. It's up there. It's in Albany sometime today, and you know, hopefully everything is good. But you know, a lot of information and obviously a lot learned after a year of doing this to make it better. I always like to say with every district we talk to, whether it be administrators or teachers, year one of anything is a trial year. So for anyone in anywhere in New York State to think, oh my goodness, I got a developing, I'm going to be fired, the lawsuit would follow about 30 seconds after that pink slip if you were fired based on the numbers in year one. It's not going to happen. So, but a lot of data and a lot of good things that can be done with this data as time goes on. To dive in, though, a little bit to our system, talk about what are some of the new things that we've learned as we've been doing this, capturing all of that data. One thing we came up with was this idea of categorizing our employees. So most districts we work with have set up APPR on the observation side where there are different requirements. Generally, the big category is tenured versus non-tenured. So maybe you have to do 2 formal observations on your tenured teachers, 3 observations on your untenured teachers. Different categorizations like that we've seen. You'll notice at the end you can add additional categories because it does differ district by district. I've seen some that have categories for leave replacements, categories for people who were out on leave. So if I know ahead of time you're going out on leave for so many days, I'm only going to do 1 observation on you, not 2. Different things like that to be able to capture it. And there's a benefit to that, which basically is that we can use this as a workflow tracking tool for administrators, and both at the building and district level. So again, pointing back to last year and thinking of some of the things we saw is some districts noticed that it's May, and they have a building with 100 teachers, and they notice there's 40 observations complete, and it's May. Anybody who's been a principal in the room, you're going to be able to get those 100 observations done in a month because May and June are never crazy in a school to begin with. So I'm sure, you know, it's very, very stress-free time. It's real easy to deal with, and then to have that thrown your way is a lot of fun. So what this allows us to do is keep track from day one of school who needs what done. So as a building principal, you're able to look in and see, okay, this is what I as an individual am supposed to do and have occur in my building. and as a district level administrator to be able to drill down and look in on your principals to find out, is it being done? Are they making the progress you would hope they'd be making? And if not, why not? One thing we learned over last year from districts using us for this, for our observation system, was there were a lot of people who did observations. There's nothing in our system. What happened? Well, I like to do it on paper. So I have the paper. It's in my desk somewhere. And now it's the end of the year, and the people are sitting there saying, okay, we got to get the 60-point scores. And somebody pulls out, okay, here's my stack of paper. And someone else says, I'm done already because mine's in the system, and I click the calculate button. You know, big difference. So make sure that doesn't happen. It lets you look in and, you know, a month into school, be able to go to your principals and say, I don't see anything having been done in your building. And when they tell you, well, that's because I did it all on Word documents, sheets of paper, you say, time to start getting it in the system now. I want to see those numbers, those bars of not done going down, and the bars of completed observations moving up. So it's a great way to be able to track that. And again, it's going to be very customizable from the perspective of adding whatever categories you've negotiated as part of your APPR plan, whatever numbers you've associated with them. And also potentially, and this is an interesting one, we have several districts using different forms for whether or not you're tenured or untenured. So you might actually have different indicators evaluated based on whether you're tenured or untenured. So you can associate that with those categories so that it removes the human error. It makes it so the principal doesn't accidentally choose the tenured form for somebody who's untenured. This way you can have HR handling this, the people who hold that data sacred, know it's accurate, and then your principals are just worrying about doing their job of observing, not worrying about doing the job of someone else to say who's a tenured teacher here. The second major enhancement we had on the observation side was a scheduler. And this came about from conversations we had with a couple of districts where, first of all, they would tell us that the way they did this last year was they had big Excel files where column 1 is all of the staff members in a building. Column 2 says observation 1. Column 3 says observation 2, and everybody puts in the initials of whoever the administrator is doing that. Not the most efficient way of tracking that. You know, having experience tracking things in Excel like that, that's when it's the, oh, Heather, did I forget to send you the update where I filled out 10 people? And then you're like, well, I already filled out 30 other people, and now somebody's got to sit there with the painstaking task of trying to merge our two files together and then realizing we picked 3 of the same people, and everybody's stepping on each other's toes, and no one even knows it, thinking they're managing this as a great process. Or they miss people, right, absolutely. Absolutely, right, exactly, right. And you see a lot of change in a teacher from Monday through Friday, right? Just in that 1 week, you'll see a lot of growth out of them. So, you know, is that even fair to the teacher to give scores like that? Of course not. The other part, though, we had some districts using other products for their observation piece that had schedulers built in, but they didn't like what they did. So one in particular, we were meeting with an assistant superintendent, and he's showing me in another product, and he says, well, basically what they do is give me a giant list of just day by day by day, and what he came to us and says, why can't it look like Outlook? Why can't it be a calendar? That's what people think of when they're scheduling things. Why can't I do that? And we sat down and talked with him and went over what would that look like to you, and this is what we came up with, a calendar that would show all of the different people scheduled when they're scheduled, so you can look at it kind of, again, mimicking Outlook, so you have the today and tomorrow, just quickly what's coming up right now that I need to think about, because, I mean, I know how the lives of administrators go. You're sitting there thinking, tomorrow's a quiet day, and then there's a fight, there's a fire drill, there's all these different things that go on that get in the way. Few of the things, though, that we decided to integrate with that was, one is a feature to basically take anything you put in this calendar and have the ability to put it right into Outlook. So it's on your Outlook calendar. You're not constantly logging into our system to see when am I supposed to go where. Use the tool you're using to manage all of your calendars. Another important one was clerical access. Principals are in charge of doing the observations, but that doesn't mean they're the person who's sitting there saying, I'm going into this classroom on Tuesday, I'm going into that classroom on Thursday. That may be a clerical task in some districts, so to be able to give out that access to clerical staff to say, you're responsible for Kristen, where she's supposed to be when, get that in there, but no one else. You as yourself can certainly change things, but you may be having someone, you delegate that out to another person. Final thing was, what do we want to schedule? Again, I love to say with APPR, we were naive, maybe stupid in thinking that there was going to be like 4 or 5 real patterns that we'd see with APPR plans, and across all New York State it would be like everybody pick, I'm going to go with model A or model B. Yeah, like I say, you can decide if we were naive or stupid for thinking that, but the reality is there's as many differences as there are districts. So we can't think of everything you might want to schedule that was negotiated as having a time frame of when it has to happen. And I've heard all different things. We came up with the standard ones of saying, well, there's the observation, there may be a pre-conference, there would be a post-conference, but just as an example, I know a district that says, so within 5 days of conducting an observation, we have to have our post-conference. 2 days after that, the teacher must submit a reflection document back to the administrator to submit as evidence of professional growth. Well, I know of one district doing that, just one district. So we want to be able to accommodate that. So they have the ability to go in there when they're sitting down with the teacher at the post-conference. They can talk with the teacher and say, let's pick a date right now. Let's sit down and say, when am I getting that reflection document? Will you be able to get it to me tomorrow? Will it be Monday? When will it be? Put it on a calendar. The beauty of this is, from the administrative side, think of this as your accountability mechanism. When somebody comes back and says, Linda, you didn't get it to me in 5 days, you can say, it's right here on the calendar. You didn't show up on that day. You were out sick. That's why it didn't happen in 5 days. But we can see we talked about it. I have evidence saying you were going to sit down with me for your post-conference on Friday. We did the observation Monday. We're within the 5-day window. You were out sick that day. That's why it took 6 days. Nothing I can do about that. You have that evidence piece to be able to say, this is why the negotiated requirement wasn't met, as opposed to, I know from a lot of districts it was just a conversation at the end of the observation. Okay, when do you want to sit down and meet? And you're just scribbling it on a piece of note paper right then and there. Teacher didn't see it, so the teacher can easily just say, well, you never told me you were coming in on Friday. I had no idea. It gives you that accountability piece to make sure that everyone knows whether or not those union obligations are being met. And the beauty of that, too, is as district administrators, you have the ability to know, are people meeting those obligations, because you know you're going to hear about it if the principals aren't meeting those 5-day timelines. So you can look and say to your principals, if they're not, what's going on here? We're going to hear about this in June if we don't get this corrected now. There may be some legitimate reasons, but if not, we've got to work on this because it's not going to end well for anybody.
You're going to hear about it in appeal.
Exactly. You're going to no, right. You're going to get your appeal of that score to say you never did it in the right amount of time, and that's why I didn't grow, because 6 days is too much notice and I can't grow for the rest of the year because of that one day. This one, I love the feature, but it's been very interesting as to how this came about. So last year we had the ability, obviously, to capture your evidence in support of your observation, but we had just basically plain text boxes. And we knew we wanted to get down the path of formatting, but I love the reason we got, and it was amazing because I would have never suspected this would be the #1 reason we were hearing from districts as to why you needed this. And the two that became most important were italics and underline, and it was from English teachers. There was a lot of complaints coming that you wrote down the novel that we were discussing and you didn't properly cite it in MLA style. It needs to be underlined. And I was shocked. I was shocked that was, but I'm not talking one district. We probably had 20 districts saying that that was a problem, that teachers had concerns that they weren't underlined or italicized properly. And I was surprised by that. They wanted it to be correct. I can understand it, but we reacted to that and said, how do we address that concern? How do we make sure our system can handle that moving forward so that they can do this? If that's the number, first of all, I'll say, there's that philosophy of people will always find something to complain about. So if, as an administrator, if the biggest complaint you're hearing about APPR is you're not underlining stuff, you need a pat on the back. But how do we accommodate that? How do we adapt our system to meet those needs so that that's one less complaint that people are going to hear, one less headache going on? So we added bold, underline, italic, and bullets and numbered lists. And you can see there's also a few other options on here. It's a little small, but we have spell checkers, find and replace, different things like that to try and make this look professional and something that your teachers are not going to come back to you and say, oh, you misspelled 10 things. This doesn't look like you gave me the time of day when you wrote this up. Make it look like a professional document and be valuable to them. At the end of the day, this is not supposed to be about a 60-20-20. This is supposed to be about making teachers better so that students get better. We can have a great debate about whether or not it will do that, but that should be the goal. On the SLO side, last year what we mainly did as a company was focus on a very managed process for SLOs, because one of the things we knew is we work with districts ranging from about 17,000, 18,000 students down to a district of 14 students, so really running the gamut of size. In a giant district, they recognize that they need to hire people whose sole job is APPR. In the small districts, they didn't care. 14 students, you have one SLO maybe going on. It's not a burden. It's really in those middle-sized districts in that 2,000 to 5,000, 6,000 range that this was the worst thing ever. dealing with SLOs, because what it just became is most people I talked to said the assistant superintendent of curriculum became the assistant superintendent of APPR last year. You didn't focus on your curriculum. You didn't focus, and remember, this is also the year of Common Core, so you have all those curriculum changes coming your way, and you couldn't focus on that with the goal of APPR being to make the teachers better so the students get better, but you can't work on curriculum, which is actually how students grow and get better, right? So what we focused on last year was saying that we were going to basically manage the whole process for you. Give us the scores, we'll get them loaded. We'll do this, we'll do that, do it all for you. One of the things we learned is, especially in those mid-sized districts, is you didn't have a person who was cataloging all your APPR, all your SLO scores, your pre-tests, your post-tests. They were done, and maybe in a teacher's gradebook. They were done and sometimes maybe sitting as a stack of papers on someone's desk of scores. They weren't in a central system. So what we've built is a system that allows the district to manage getting those scores in and to distribute this throughout the district. That's one of the things we're seeing a lot of districts learn from last year is it was one person last year, and Linda, it's not going to help you much because it's all you, but a lot of districts said, this is great, I can give this to my directors. And you're sitting there saying, that's me, and I can give this out to the other assistant superintendent, still me. But the idea being, who else can we distribute some of this to get other people entering in the information, getting it all in there, so that it's not all on the shoulders of one person. It's moving it down the food chain a little bit, and also spreading out the accountability. The other part that went along with this is, we noticed a lot of districts that wanted to manage everything central office last year saying, we want the teachers doing it this year. Because it is, but here was the other side that we learned of the things of, Linda, justify why you gave me a 17. Because I didn't see any of the stuff going in. I don't know what you did, how you did it, anything like that. I suddenly get my stuff at the end of June at the best, maybe September at the worst, and suddenly I find out I'm developing. Why?
It's transparency, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
That they need to see, and they had that because I
Sure.
did this all last year, but this being able to pull up just their kids and look at just their
Right.
kids is going to make it
Absolutely.
so much more powerful.
Because the beauty of that is you're having your teachers log in and say, that's my correct roster. So in October, when they verify that, or November, they're looking at it and they said, that's my roster. So when they come to you in April and say, where's Johnny? I say, remember in November you went and you looked at your roster, you said your roster was good. Why didn't you worry about Johnny then?
Right.
So you can at least have that kind of back and forth to say there is some level of accountability on the teacher to verify the data is correct, because the thought that in districts of any decent size that you know what kids are in what classroom, it doesn't happen. I'm always impressed that you guys know as many teachers in buildings as you guys do when we start rattling off names and you seem to, I know that they're a third grade teacher in that building. I'm always impressed by that. Can't imagine trying to do that with students. So the teachers have to take some responsibility for that. They have to know what are their scores. Are the scores in there? Was Mary's score missing because it got lost, or was Mary absent that day? Principal may not know. Central office isn't going to know. The teacher will know. So they get a level of accountability to say, my data is good. And then at the end, all you're doing is saying, I did the calculations on the data you said was good.
So who actually has the rights to load this exam? Can I do it district-wide anyway?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. The way our system is set up is permission-based, so we can give out permissions to different people, take them away, whoever districts want. So it's been very different in different districts. This is a CIO. That's the only person in the district who can do this. Yeah. Some it's been principals. We have some districts where BOCES is sending us all the data, so it really all depends on the district and where is that data. Because again, naive last year, we thought it was all in the SMS.
No.
We thought they'd put it in there, that they'd track it somewhere. Yeah, and then, yeah.
It wasn't, not mine.
And there are some that did a very good job of tracking it centrally, and then there's other ones, the horror stories that we heard of I had a filing box in my trunk that had all the tests in it, and I remember somebody saying I had to do something with that, but I don't remember what it was, and I think I might have emptied out my trunk. So what do? I don't have pre-tests anymore. Right, yeah. Right. So, that kind of stuff, and, what do?
You didn't have an answer for that?
No, I didn't. I didn't know what to do, right?
I just want to share with you,
Sure.
my husband wrote about a great day he's having as an associate principal. They had a car that caught on fire in front of their building,
goodness.
and the whole fire department's there, so maybe
Oh, wow.
that's where
There's
some
the box.
SLOs were.
It was in the trunk. So, but keeping them, we really were hoping that everybody would get this into the SMSs, and it didn't happen. And that's a big thing that came with APPR is accuracy of data. that knowing that it's accurate where we're getting it from, and it's been a challenge on us and on districts because it would be things, well, we need your teach IDs, and we say, well, we're getting that out of your SMS. And like, well, we don't. It's in there, but I can't tell you if they're accurate. You got to get that out of the HR system. That's where we keep that accurate. And then you say, well, who manages that? Well, not the same guy who manages the SMS, and he's not used to sending stuff out to vendors because that's not what happens there. It's just it's been a real amazing process of trying to get all that data together. Okay, at this point, we've gone through what are some of the new things we did over the last year, and what we want to do now is to have people go into the system. So everybody should have a tablet in front of them, and we're going to want to go to Internet Explorer, and I'm going to kind of do it up here on the laptop as well. But we're going to log into the system as district administrators. So what we're going to do is everybody's going to have a username. The passwords are all going to be password, but we're going to go around the room starting with, everything is going to start with DIST admin. And then we're going to have numbers starting over here. We're going to start with the number 10. So we go 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And then the password is password. And what we're going to do is go into the section of our system called walkthrough evaluations. Now, as I had mentioned, every district we've worked with has set things up so differently in their APPR plan. We have some districts not even really doing walkthrough evaluations for APPR. They want to do it, though, from a professional development perspective, but it's not really part of the scoring. And that's what we're going to demonstrate here today, is how do you use this for professional development. So we're going to, at the top here, there's going to be an Add Walkthrough button, and I'm going to ask you to actually search for my name. So at this point, it's just going to ask you a little bit of summary information about your observation. So a couple things here to just note for people who haven't used this before in our system is, number one, you can choose the date. It defaults to today, but we know how this actually winds up going on in a building, which might be I did it on Monday, and I wrote notes scribbled on paper, and then I go back on Tuesday when I've got a little free time in my office to enter that information. So I'm doing it on Tuesday, but I want to say it happened on Monday because that's when the observation really occurred. The other one, and this is going to be critical if you're using the scheduling feature of our system, is announced versus unannounced. With the scheduler, a great feature of that is the system will automatically send out emails to people. So an administrator will get an email when they have an observation scheduled. The teacher gets an email to let them know they have an observation scheduled, if it's announced. So if you set it as announced when you meant to be unannounced, it's not unannounced anymore. They'll know. So that's very important to make sure you get that correct. The other things we have, and for today's purposes, the first two, you can choose whatever you'd like, what school you want, and what grade. The grade also includes subject areas so that it can be used to track at the high school level as well. And we'll see why in a moment. For the class, I'm going to ask everyone to choose the PM session. And we click Add. And what we have set up for this is basically going to be a modified version of the Danielson rubric that just basically has a few of the indicators pulled out so that they didn't quite apply when we're not in the classrooms. I said this morning, and I was corrected that he might want to, but Joe Stern, when I said no one's going to throw any desks, Joe Stern let me know after getting through APPR this year, he was in a mood to throw desks, so I might have needed some more classroom control stuff on here. But basically, we have the different indicators that are part of the Danielson rubric in domains 1, 2, and 3. And this particular observation is set up simply with observed, not evaluated, as opposed to Heidi ratings. And the interesting part about districts that went with this model was that this is much more like what everybody's been doing for observations for the past 20 years, just more in the qualitative mode than in the quantitative. You're not giving scores. So this was the non-threatening piece. This was the, I want to help you, make you better, and they would recognize it as that because that's the way it's always been. The formals were the, you're getting numbers, because we have to, whether we like to or not. That's what the state says we must do. But this is much more of a professional development tool. And we had some districts go ahead and say, I'm not even going to base these on Danielson, on Marshall, anything like that. We're going to use what we've used in years past as the model for this. Question we always get is, what is the difference between not observed and not evaluated? And it's an excellent question, and it's really important too, because we've seen this with talking to some districts with some other software they've used, is not observed is a bad score. Not evaluated means I wasn't looking for something. So I use an example of, I'm doing this, I walk into a classroom, I'm expecting to be there for a half hour, I'm the building principal. Then all of a sudden I see a kid fly into a locker in the hall and there's a fight and I gotta leave the room, obviously. Do I take points off for the teacher because I didn't observe anything in domains 2 and 3? I didn't observe anything in domains 2 and 3 because I didn't get there yet. It just didn't happen because of the circumstances of the day. So not evaluated means it's basically doesn't apply. It's an NA, where this is, you get a point, you lose a point, and this is didn't happen that day. I'm not scoring you based on it.
So is there a score attached to this at the end of the day? Because to me, not observed is, I was there for 10 minutes, and I saw no evidence that I'm going to
Right.
take for respect or for the kids, whatever
Yeah.
whatever I didn't capture it.
Right.
So to me, a not observed would be something for me as a principal. I've got to get back into that room
Absolutely.
and find evidence, because it's my responsibility as a principal to capture domains 2 and 3.
Absolutely. So the short answer of that is we can customize this because some districts do want it to come down to a score, some districts don't. And what I'm going to show on here is basically we're going to go through some reports that would let you see, let me pull up Dominic's score over the weeks and months and years and say, what are the things I'm not seeing over the time? So meaning, in any one observation, to think that you'll see every single thing, it doesn't happen. But through the course of the year, you should, if you're timing these appropriately, or maybe you're timing your observations poorly. Maybe you've picked every day when they're not doing assessment. And then maybe you need to talk to that teacher to say, is Friday a bad day to come in when I'm trying to find you doing assessments? Because I keep coming in on Fridays and I never see it. And they tell you, oh, my quiz day is Thursday. Good information to have. So that's what we're going to see here. So what I'd like everybody to do is kind of go through and do that and check them off. And you'll also notice the other important one is everything is left as not evaluated. And it's funny because we were talking with somebody at lunch who was saying they had problems with their system they were using because it defaulted to basically giving everybody zeros, and principals didn't necessarily know that and thought they were saying, I didn't look for domain 2 and we're giving everybody zeros on domain 2. So all you have to do is click off in the box. Oops. And then when you're done, what we'll want to do is click the Finish button either at the top of the screen or all the way at the bottom. Okay. Now, the way our system works with observations is recognizing, number one, this is obviously confidential information. But on top of that, it's something that's revised and changed as the process moves forward. So what we've noticed at most districts is they don't consider an observation finalized until the post-conference, which makes sense. You're looking in that post-conference to get feedback from the teacher, to basically talk about what did you see and not see, and agree upon what happened in the classroom. So at this point in time, you'll notice I can see on here that, so I just, at the point when I clicked save, 3 other people had been working on theirs and saved it. I can't open them. They're still drafts at this point. So right now, this is as if that sheet of paper exists on that principal's desk. No one else in the world has access to it. It's just on there. It's not done. It's not submitted yet for scoring purposes. It's a draft. It could still be deleted at this point, which is why we have this column here that says mark is complete with a little disk icon, which is fun because everybody, we were talking this morning, a few more years people will say, why is that save? So when we click that, it'll mark it as complete. And a question that we get all the time, so this little lock icon, because now I say it's done, set in stone. We learned over the course of last year that that isn't reality. I believe as of last week, we were still getting a few phone calls from people saying, I need to unlock an observation I did in April or I did in March because we found a problem, or a number was entered incorrectly or something like that. So this idea that it was done, it wasn't done. But at the same time, how do we make sure that people can't just go ahead and just make any changes they see fit after this has already been marked as complete, maybe signed by the teacher, filed in an HR folder, everything for all intents and purposes is done. So what we basically came up with was a way to say, we need both parties to agree. So a principal can go in there and say, I found a problem in the observation, I want to make a change. And they click that little lock icon to unlock it. At that point, the teacher is going to get an email saying the administrator has requested to be able to open this observation again to make changes to it. The teacher has a say in that. So this way you're basically allowing the administrator to make changes, but you're not going to hear from your union kinds of things of, well, here's the piece of paper the teacher says they signed, and here's what your system's printing out now, and those numbers don't match. Because the teacher, there's an audit log here, we know on what date and time the teacher approved that unlock. So if a teacher ever says, well, that's not what you gave me back in March, we can say, yeah, because in May, you said, go ahead and make some changes to it. That's why it changed. So it gives both parties a say in whether or not to do it. If the teacher says, no, you can't open it, then I guess we live with the scores we both agreed to at the time. Once we have a bunch of these complete, what I want to show, and this is kind of going to what you were asking, Linda, about the how do you use that data to say, what do I need to find later? Or worst case is the teacher's not doing it. Maybe that's why I'm not seeing it, not that I just came in on a bad day. Maybe they're not doing something that they should be. How do we look at some reports that let us know that? And we have several, and I'm going to focus on two. The first one is going to be an individual teacher report. And when we run that, this is basically going to be across the year. It's going to show me the different things that have been observed on that one teacher by whomever was doing the observations. I'm going to zoom in a little on this so we can see a little better. But we can see here, so this is including this morning as well. We have a few that were marked as complete from this afternoon too. I can see these boxes that are open that are saying didn't see it. So if I'm looking at this on one teacher and I see, you know, a particular indicator where it's no across the school year, what's going on there? Why aren't we seeing respect and rapport? What's happening? For certain things, there's always going to be those, somebody had an off day, something didn't happen, whatever. You're going to see holes here and there, but can you see a pattern when you're looking at this? And the other thing is you can see who did the observations. So maybe it's not Kristen's subjectivity thinking Dominic doesn't do this. If we see 4 different administrators said Dominic doesn't do this, odds are Dominic doesn't do this. We're seeing different people's opinions saying that I'm not seeing respect and rapport, so what's going on here? That's great to know about one teacher, but as district administrators and even as building administrators, how do you use this to improve what's going on? So it would be great if every principal and every superintendent could sit down with teachers one-on-one all the time and go over, here's what I think you could do to grow as an employee. And there's opportunities for that, but to be able to do that as frequently as you'd really like to, it just doesn't happen. So what we also have is some roll-up reports. And they're all very similar. I'm going to focus on the one that we call the teacher roll-up. But the grade and school work the same way. It's just we only did observations on me today, so I don't have other people to summarize in here. But it'll look the same, and we can talk about how that would be used. What we get is a percentage breakdown of each of the indicators on whatever rubric you're using to say, out of the 6 times I was looking for knowledge of students, I found it 5. That's not too bad. We're seeing here, this one here, we have 3 out of 5. That's a little bit lower. And as this second number gets bigger, obviously you have a lot more data points to say that might be something that's just not occurring versus just something I didn't see that one day. Even more important, though, is looking at this report on the building, grade level, subject area, wide range. Because now what you can start to do is identify groups for PD. If you're noticing that throughout your entire organization, you go to a building, let's just say you're in a building and you're doing your observations and you notice across the board, you see organizing physical spaces is something that you're not seeing good setups in the classroom. It's just not there. As an administrator, you can say, well, it wasn't one teacher. It wasn't 2 teachers. It was a whole building. It was a whole grade level. It was a whole pod. However you're organized to say, maybe there's a conversation that needs to be had there about how do we set up our space so that it's more conducive to learning. What can we do? You know, some of the things that were talked about this morning in the flipped classroom environment of instead of everybody facing forward, is that the most conducive way? What do you want to do? Look for those patterns, those holes in a building or in a team to be able to say, how do you take this data and make change based on it and make the teachers grow? The other one that's been interesting that we've talked to some districts about is as the data gets year over year and I'll say cleaner after the first year of, I would be interested to know how many teachers got below a 55 out of 60 across the state in year 1 on APPR? Probably not too many. So, is that the best data to be using yet? Probably not, but as everybody learns and gets familiar with the rubrics, it'll improve. Can we reorganize? Can we look at our teams and say, why do we happen to have in Team A all of the teachers who seem to have holes in setting instructional outcomes, when we've got Team B over here who seems to be doing an amazing job in that area, what if we started mingling those people together and taking some of the strengths from this team and mixing them with the strengths from that team, and basically using this idea that teachers are on a team. I always like to think about, and I've had this conversation with a bunch of administrators, isn't it, I think we had it when we were at Center Riches the other day, isn't it awful when you get the phone calls of I want my child to be in that teacher's class because everyone knows that's the good teacher? That should be the whole, there shouldn't be that. It should be I don't care which teacher my child gets because all of the teachers are great. And if teachers look at this as a team mentality, as I don't just want to be the best fourth grade teacher in my district, I want us to have the best fourth grade in New York State, in the country, wherever, you're going to see some change. So to foster a culture wherein the people who are great at building respect and rapport with their students, along with the people who are great for building a culture for learning, put them together so they can build off each other's strengths and help each other through their weaknesses, you can see some real change here. So again, this idea is to let you see exactly that across a person, across a building, across a grade, across any kind of content area. What are my weaknesses so that your team leaders, your building leaders, your content area coordinators can look and say, we've got a real hole when it comes to this particular thing. How do we help?
My biggest issue with this
Sure.
is there's no evaluation. It's observed, not observed. So to me, I can have evidence that I observed, but it's evidence of bad practice.
Sure.
So I don't know that this tool would be, for me, for my staff and the way we do our observation, to me it would be a check on the administrator to be able to say, oh gosh, I don't have
Sure.
evidence of that, but I would not use this as a tool to change practice.
Right.
Because I could get a lot of, and I have a lot of evidence for certain teachers, and I'm like, wow, it's evidence of very, very bad practice.
Absolutely. So what you would be doing if you were filling out this form, and we can change, all of our forms are customizable. So we could have, this one was set up observed, not observed. We could have,
Numbers.
yeah, plenty districts do HEDI.
Yeah.
Right. Right. But you could also do things where I have positive versus negative evidence. So I'm taking comments and I want to say, were these positive comments of that indicator or were they negative comments of that indicator? So you can look, compare the two. It's very customizable because, again, every single district we've seen does something completely different. There are some districts, like you're mentioning, where you're keeping a running record.
After a couple of districts, it was easier. It didn't, because everyone wanted it their way, the way that
Absolutely.
they've-
Absolutely.
and that's what they- right, and
It
that's
sure
what
is.
they did. We just kept changing
How do we change it to meet your needs? One of the things, even specifically, we talked about, you can print out an observation, and we start the year by saying, okay, we've got a standardized printout that we think looks really nice and works well, but every district came to us and said, well, we negotiated something. This is what our administrator signed off on handing out. This is what our union signed off on handing out. What are we going to give to the teachers then? We can't just give this thing Right Reason came up with because that's not the way it looks. So we built the system that says you send us a Word document of what your form looks like, and we make our form look like yours.
Gotcha.
So we understand that there are, like I said, there's no two districts that came up with the same thing for APPR. Even people who tell me we copied our plan from such and such district, it's still different.
Right.
There's still little nuances to it in the way the scores are calculated, in the way that 60 points ends up. And everybody thinks, like when you say it's a philosophy statement, everyone will always say things, especially NICET is the best example of it. Everyone will always tell us, we're doing exactly what the TED workbook tells us to do. And I talked to another district that says, we're doing exactly what the TED workbook tells us to do. I'm like, yeah, but you two guys are not doing the same thing. But they're both convinced they are following the letter of what they were told is best practice. Because everybody puts their little spin on it, what's right for their district, because no two are the same. And so we adapt. We try to say, okay, well, how does your scoring work? How does your observation work? So if you wanted to use this for, what we basically, just to use you as an example, is at Center Riches, you have much more of a comment-based system where you're tracking notes over the year.
Yeah.
Just the evidence, like you said, whether it's positive or negative, you're just tracking evidence. What other districts have done is for each and every observation, they go HEDI on every single indicator and then average those together at the end of the year. Everybody has done it differently, and we try to set up our system to accommodate whatever was negotiated, and they really do run the gamut from the, come up with numbers last day of school to the, in October, I've already got 40% of your score done. So it really is very different. Does anyone else have any questions on this? I know we covered a lot of information. Are there any specific things that you've encountered doing observations or SLOs where you want to know, would this be able to be adapted to do that or anything?
I've seen you guys do it a lot. I'm so impressed.
It's been a real challenge. I mentioned at the beginning, and it's just we really thought there was going to be a lot more similarity than there was.
I really did too. I didn't realize that there was going to be so many different ways to look at the same thing.
Sure. And there have been. And every time we meet a new district and look at their plan, we find yet another way that no one else thought of. And it's been really interesting, though, looking at it from the outside looking in, to be able to say to people, to have sessions like we'll have this afternoon where we're bringing districts together to talk about what did they do, because so much of this, it is so varied, would be, I didn't think of what they were doing. And if I would make that one little tweak, and if they would make this one little tweak, we'd both have such a plan that would be so much more better than what either of us came up individually. And now that everyone has a year under their belt of trying this out and doing different things, it is amazing where you talk to people and people will say, well, I did this, this, and this. And somebody says, I never thought of that. And that would be so much better than what I'm doing, be it administratively and the amount of work it takes, or educationally in the instructional value of the data it gives you coming out of it. Just with anything, we always try to look at, numbers and data are great, but numbers and data are just numbers and data unless you know what to do with them. This is useless if we're just going to say, look, a whole bunch of checks, you're great. What do I do with this? What does a student do when you give them a 30? Do they just fail? Is that it? Are we done? It's your first test at the end of September and you failed, therefore I write you off for the rest of your year? Or is it, how do I help you to grow to be an A student? How do we help an ineffective or developing teacher grow to be an effective or a highly effective teacher? The same philosophy. So it's, how do you take this data and make your PD? How do you take this data and use it to encourage your teachers to make their students grow so that at the end they grow? Anyone else? All right, I think we're just a couple minutes early, so we're pretty good then. All right, well, thank you guys.